Earl of Wessex. Godwin, Harold's father, was the most powerful man in England. He was extolled to such an extent, as if he ruled the king and all of England, says the Chronicle of Florence of Worcester. So it, in essence, also was. King Edward the Confessor, a weak-willed, quiet and extremely pious monarch, was only a puppet in his hands. Godwin, the leader of the Danish party at the English court, had to defend his influence in a sharp struggle with the supporters of the Norman party. In 1051, the latter even managed to win a temporary victory and send Godwin into exile. However, the very next year, the powerful Earl, with the support of the army he recruited in Flanders, and the active help of his son Harold, returned to England and restored the former influence of his family, in turn expelling all supporters of Normandy from the country. In 1053, after the death of Godwin, his eldest son Harold inherited both his father's vast landholdings and his power, becoming the de facto ruler of the state. For 13 years he ruled England on behalf of the weak-willed Edward the Confessor. However, this reign was far from unclouded. The fact is that the Godwin family cracked. Mutual hatred divided Harold and his brother Tostig, Earl of Northumbria, an envious and spiteful man. This enmity later led to dire consequences. Harold's unexpected adventure also had far-reaching consequences. In 1064, while making an inspection voyage off the south coast of England, he ran into a severe storm that threw his ship onto the French coast. Count Ponthieu, the owner of those lands, in accordance with the then coastal law, demanded a huge ransom from Harold, otherwise threatening to confiscate the ship with all its cargo. The Duke of Normandy William, who unexpectedly intervened in this dispute, demanded that the vassal immediately release Harold and all his companions. The greedy count was forced to submit and escort the shipwreck to the Duke's court. Harold and Wilhelm quickly became friends. They had fun and feasts, hunted together and even fought with the Britons. Wilhelm knighted his guest. However, this friendship was not entirely disinterested. The Norman Duke pursued far-reaching goals. Based on the dynastic connections of his father, Robert the Devil, William claimed the crown of England, and Harold could become his main rival over time. That is why he invited his guest to conclude an agreement, according to which William, after the death of the childless Edward the Confessor, became the King of England, and Harold became the Earl of Wessex, that is, the second person in the kingdom. It must be assumed that Harold did not really like this distribution of roles, because he himself aimed for the English throne. Nevertheless, he had to take a solemn oath to William, which sealed this agreement, otherwise the Duke of Normandy simply would not have released him alive. Edward the Confessor died on January 5, 1066, and with his death the great dynasty of Saxon kings died out. Harold, who enjoyed universal support in England and was recommended as an heir by Edward himself, was solemnly crowned in Westminster Abbey. He forgot to think about the oath given to Wilhelm, considering it forced, and, therefore, having no force. So Harold became King of England, achieving what his powerful father could not have dreamed of. But in the spring, an ominous sign appeared in the sky, foreshadowing the near end of his short reign. It was a comet that terrified the superstitious people of the Middle Ages. And soon King Harold, alarmed by the appearance of a comet, had a prophetic dream. He saw that the entire sea horizon was covered with countless ships sailing towards England. This terrible vision made him tremble. One of the scenes of the famous canvas from Bayeux, which depicts the entire history of the Norman conquest of England, captured Harold's prophetic dream. It depicts the throne of Harold, and under it is a whole cluster of ships, as if materialized from the fears and anxieties of the Anglo-Saxon king. However, the first blow did not come from the south, as one might expect, but from the northeast, from Norway. Harold's vengeful brother, Tostig, whom the king expelled from the country, appeared before the Norwegian king and persuaded him to undertake an invasion of England. The state of the island's defenses at that time left much to be desired. The coast was almost not guarded, and Harold the Severe, carried away by the idea of becoming the ruler of England, succumbed to Tostig's persuasion. In September 1066, a Norwegian fleet led by Harold and Tostig sailed up the Humber. The Norwegians, having defeated the militias of the local earls, camped near York, at Stamford Bridge. It's time for King Harold to draw his sword. So, the time has come for King Harold to draw his sword, and he, having made a swift march to the north, 5 days later, at the head of the squadron militias, appeared before the enemy. The British attacked the enemy, taken by surprise, but the Vikings fought back furiously. Then Harold applied the technique of false retreat. The formation of the Norwegians opened up, and the Anglo-Saxons, suddenly stopping their retreat, turned around to face the taken-aback enemy and inflicted heavy damage on the Scandinavians. At the same time, King Harold the Severe was mortally wounded by an arrow in the throat, and Tostig took command. Harold offered his brother to make peace and promised to save the lives of all the surviving Vikings, but they contemptuously rejected this offer, and almost all died under the blows of the English axes. Tostig, who did not hide his malice, was captured and executed. After the battle, Harold ordered that Harold and Tostig be given the English land they coveted, giving them 7 feet each for a grave. The king failed to celebrate this brilliant victory. The battle at Stamford Bridge had barely died down when a dusty messenger brought him terrible news. William's Norman fleet approached Pevensey. Harold with the remnants of the army had to hastily rush from north to south. A week later, the king was in London and, having gathered all the available forces, rushed to Pevensey. On October 13, the British occupied the gloomy Telham Hill and blocked the road to London for the new enemy. Harold chose a good defensive position. On one side Telham Hill was approached by dense forest, which served as a natural fortification of the British position, and on the other 2 sides the hill ended in steep slopes. Harold ordered the only side open to attack to be blocked with a palisade, blocking the gaps between the stakes with high shields dug into the ground with sharp ends. The main force of Harold's army was infantry, armed with long heavy axes. The weapons of the Saxon peasant militias were weaker. It consisted of iron-bound spears and clubs. The Anglo-Saxon army numbered about 10,000 fighters. About the same number was among the Normans. However, unlike the British, Duke Wilhelm had numerous knightly cavalry. On October 14, 1066, the Battle of Hastings took place, a turning point in the history of England. At first, the British successfully repulsed all the attacks of the enemy cavalry. Their heavy axes crushed the helmets of knights, cut through chain mail, killed and maimed horses. The Normans had never faced such tenacious foot soldiers in battle. In a cruel twist of fate, Harold was killed at Hastings by what had helped him at Stamford Bridge, a false retreat. Only this time it was not Harold who applied this trick, but Wilhelm. Brave but inexperienced English peasants with joyful cries left the fortification and rushed in disorderly crowds in pursuit of the enemy. They had to pay dearly for this. William of Poitiers, the chaplain of the Duke of Normandy, believed, however, that there was not a feigned retreat, but a real stampede, and only William's personal intervention prevented the inevitable defeat of the Norman knights. Seeing that the enemies were pursuing his retreating army, the Duke sent his horse forward, stopped the fugitives with a cry and raised a spear into the air. The flight was delayed, and then the Duke took off his helmet and, standing in front of the soldiers with his head uncovered, exclaimed, "Look at me. I'm still alive and, if it's God's will, I can still win. What madness has put you on the run, and where are you running? You allow yourself to be persecuted by those who should be slaughtered, as cattle are slaughtered in a slaughterhouse. You are depriving me of victory, and yourselves of glory and honor, dooming us all to shame. Do you really think that running away will save your life and save you from death?" With these words, he restored the courage of the soldiers, again jumped on his horse, waved his death-bearing blade and rushed to the enemies. The Normans, inflamed by his speech, surrounded several thousand pursuers and hacked them all to one. The greatly depleted Anglo-Saxon troops rallied around the royal standard and continued to fight to the death. But then Wilhelm's archers began a massive shelling of their position. A shower of arrows, from which it was impossible to hide, fell upon the defenders. First, both Harold's brothers fell, Gurth and Leofben, and a few minutes later an arrow dug into the king's right eye. Mortally wounded, he fell off his horse and died next to his standard. Seeing the death of the king, the British rushed to run towards the forest, but only a few managed to escape. The knights overtook them and cut them down, giving no mercy to anyone. That was the fate of England. The conquerors brutally suppressed all resistance attempts, establishing a regime of bloody terror in the kingdom. William became King of England. As for King Harold, his body mysteriously disappeared after the battle. According to one version, the bloodthirsty Normans, having torn off expensive armor from the murdered king, chopped him into small pieces. According to another, Harold's naked body, wrapped in a purple veil, was hidden among the rocks near the bay. To all the requests of Harold's mother and wife to give them the body of the deceased king for burial, William the Conqueror answered with a decisive refusal, declaring that it was better for the king to remain lying on the Saxon coast, defending which he valiantly fell in battle. There is also a claim that the body was later found and buried in Waltham Abbey, once founded by Harold himself, the last Anglo-Saxon king.